And Anne is going to tell you about the work Koitu has been doing on futures and applying some of the main themes to Auckland. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Yes, I'm going to start off from where Peter left off. Really, he's been talking about the work to try to understand the possible trajectories going forward from COVID. And as you saw from those 5 dimensions, it really has to be looked at from a systemic point of view. And the scenarios are going to be quite complicated and complex for different countries and different regions. And we haven't quite worked out how many scenarios we'll end up with from those 5 dimensions and how they intertwine. But the issues that we've been facing have been with us for a long time. COVID has just shone a light on them and accelerated some of the trends that we already knew were going on. And in a way, it really has given us a chance to rethink our strategies about how we move forward, or indeed our lack of strategy in a lot of cases. We won't and we shouldn't really go back to a pre-COVID normality. This is an opportunity to think about the future and how we're tracking ahead and how we can actually do that better. And most of the speakers from last week, last session actually spoke about how we can do better in various ways, be it in transport, in our urban form and design, and how we view tourism and education. But it was also noted that in some ways, and I think it was Patrick might have said it, that because we didn't actually suffer as badly as some other cities have, we don't have that burning platform, I think you might have said, that would inspire us to make a change. And we are already pretty complacent in a lot of ways. Yes, our borders are closed and a lot of things are still affected, but we're kind of going about living our lives pretty normally, and it can quite easily fall back into patterns that are not going to be helpful if we're really trying to think about the long-term issues. And so that's an opportunity that we hadn't picked up on. And indeed, like New Zealand, as we know, we've been in the spotlight in a good way for our response to COVID, and we have an opportunity to capitalize on that in our export markets in various ways. But that window is closing. You know, other countries are getting vaccinated. There's a different attitude. Yes, we are a safe haven, but as Peter mentioned, that's not going to be forever. And we can't just keep our borders tight shut. We're going to have to figure out how to open them, and we have to think about how we will deal with some endemic virus in our presence, and what that means for our situation as an advantage that we had that is closing a bit. We still do have the opportunity to grab some of these opportunities because the decisions that we're making today will have long-ranging consequences, either for good or bad, for our collective future. So we all come here from Koitu, the Center for Informed Futures, and we were established when Peter stepped down as Chief Science Advisor as a think tank to focus on long-term thinking about the complex issues New Zealand is facing in the future. The slides just showing what we're about, that we are defined by transdisciplinarity, meaning we take in perspectives from all kinds of disciplines, but we also involve stakeholders and the public in framing the questions that we seek to address. It involves systems thinking and a futures focus. And we do things from a strong evidence base, all coming from various science backgrounds, including social sciences and economics now, including with Donnell, who will speak in a bit. But the conversations that we are facilitating are about these complex and long-term problems that require a lot of different voices to come to the table. That's obviously the case with the future of Auckland. And good to see all of you here in the room and all of the different types of voices that we're trying to bring to this question. But last year, so I think Peter mentioned, we only launched last year by the Governor General on the 4th of March, 2020. And a few short weeks later, we were launched into lockdown. So we quickly adapted to that, and we did bring a lot of different voices to a room. It was a Zoom room, and we had many conversations initially about the current situation, but mostly with a focus on where is this going, and how can we bring all these voices together to think about the future in this situation where we have a potential to reset some of our systems, because at that point we were in a hard lockdown, and in fact, so that led to a series of reports and conversations under the title "The Future Is Now." These two report covers that you see are the bookends. The first one, which we produced in April of 2020, so that was during lockdown. We had many conversations with strategic thinkers, business leaders, academics, a whole range of people to discuss various issues, and culminated. Well, we're still having these conversations, but the other bookend was in November of last year, and the main message was that no matter how well we initially coped with the pandemic hitting our shores, the impacts on society were likely to be so wide-ranging and profound that they could and should possibly trigger a reset. That it was an opportunity for these national careful considerations of our aspirations as a nation and now also as a city in Auckland, and what direction we should take as we look beyond the immediate to the medium and longer term. So some of the issues that came up are already touched on by Peter in those dimensions of the COVID scenarios. This slide just shows some of the questions that were raised, and our papers were mostly provocations to start those conversations and make people try to think about having a strategy for the future. They involved questions on what geostrategic consequences would we expect, and how New Zealand might respond, how different sectors of our economy might move forward, etc. But there was also a lot of focus on this issue of social cohesion, that we were showing ourselves to be quite cohesive, but that was potentially fragile. It relies on an environment of trust and transparent decision making. So we showed that we've got good, as Peter mentioned, trust vertically with our government, but also horizontally in our society. And that's something we need to think about how we maintain and actually leverage for the future. So we do have an opportunity to approach all these questions by establishing trusted partnerships and truly engaging a wider society in the private sector, NGOs, academia, and government in these critical conversations to work towards those, to try to start to answer some of these questions. And this is one of those conversations we're having now. So these are just some of those. Over that time period of various lockdowns, we produced 8 or 9 different reports on these conversations, lots of different groups, almost entirely on Zoom, I'm pretty sure. We didn't actually have a physical space ourselves, so we did deal with some of these issues that Peter touched on, including the geostrategic question, New Zealand's place in the world. Peter did... what Peter mentioned some of what we saw going on, which was a reversal of globalism and the shrinking of supply lines, countries turning in on themselves and trying to be a bit more self-sufficient, and what would that mean for New Zealand's export economy, changes of trade patterns, and etc. We also talked about the influence of digital and other technologies on the way we function as individuals and societies. We saw it take on a completely new meaning during lockdown, but we also saw the agility of education systems, not always equitably, and shone a light on digital divides and those important issues to address. But prior to COVID, just back to the trade issue, as we know, New Zealand's economy was, and still is highly dependent on trade with China, Australia, the US, and Europe, and focusing on a commodity-based trade and services-based export industries, including tourism and education, which clearly took a major hit. As Peter mentioned, export education won't be the same, and neither will tourism. We talked a bit about tourism and the Auckland situation in the last session, but discussions were already going on about the need to move to a more sustainable and carbon neutral economy. And in that lockdown and the freeze of tourism, it really was a chance to reset and think about how do we move that forward, and how our economy should think about changing for the long-term good of New Zealand and in the climate change space, the whole world. So we would say that the reset made us think, with COVID, trade-offs that might have seemed impossible prior to that crisis were starting to be seen in a more credible light. Necessity is the mother of invention. We had to do some things differently immediately. So the groups that we talked to seemed quite supportive of the idea that it was time for a green economic reset, and to truly think about things like a circular economy and how we change the way we think about making money and living. So basically, the outcome was that we needed a reset with a sense of purpose. It's obviously a time of profound change, and we shouldn't really be squandering this opportunity to actually have a strategy. So that came through on a lot of those different issues we talked in the different sectors. One of those reports, and I think I'll be putting up the slide of that again, was on the food sector and moving towards sustainable agriculture, and how during lockdown that the food sector was actually pretty well off. It was still needed, our goods were needed overseas, but we had a chance to think about what does brand New Zealand, whatever you want to call that, can we capitalize on our culture and on our environmental values and our food safety, etc., to change the way we think about our exports, not just a commodity, but high-value exports. These were two of the reports that actually had quite some of the most impact. And as I was just mentioning, one was about the food sector that keeps coming back. People still want to have that conversation, and the Aotearoa Circle is carrying on a lot of work to generate a New Zealand food strategy. But I'll end it on the environment, because we do need to just reinforce that in all the decisions we make here, that we not lose sight of our sustainable ways of thinking, that we need to keep that in all of the decisions moving forward, rather than getting caught up in our immediate concerns, that all of the decisions need to consider the environment and climate change impacts when we are making our plans, that we need to look to the long term. what's next. The last report just summed up where we're going with this, and we still have a lot of issues to face, including talking about education and reforming the education system. What does it mean now? How do we educate our young people for the future, considering these what we face now and what we know? We need to build resilience and skills and critical thinking for the future. We need to think about enhancing our democratic decision-making and breaking down some of the structural barriers to equal access to power and influence. And we are working on various methods of developing participatory and deliberative processes to have conversations on these complex issues. As I've mentioned, reimagining our economic future for sustainability and resilience, and building on our strengths, what we have shown as strengths through COVID, not to squander those opportunities for establishing a path to a better future. Thank you.
Fine. Hang on a second, if I may just detain you for one moment, Anne, with any questions for Anne on that quick run-through of that extensive array of reports, again, either by Slido or in person. May I just ask a couple? To what extent does the climate crisis loom through all your reports as the dominant driver or a driver of change, and to the extent to which it in itself is a focus for your deep thinking beyond just the COVID impacts?
Well, I've been involved a lot in climate change risk assessment. It came up from the very beginning of our broad discussion about impacts going forward from COVID. It actually has touched through pretty much all of those reports. I mean, even in the social cohesion, mental health, youth stresses about eco-anxiety. It's a driving force through a lot of what we do. I'm not sure if that's answering your question.
Partly, but I'm just trying to take it a bit further, if I may, in terms of how it changes the thinking. So, for example, the most astonishing report out this time yesterday from the International Energy Agency, where they are saying absolutely no more investment in finding more oil and gas fields. And here is the first step towards, here is a pathway to net zero energy system for the world by 2050. So that's a huge, huge change in their thinking. Now, they've been working towards that for some years. So that's why I'm interested in whether through your work, the focus on the climate crisis has brought about some big changes in your thinking rather than kind of an extension of where thinking had been going on multiple issues.
Well, I mean, I don't think the climate crisis is something that we've just discovered. So we have been thinking about it for quite a long time. I mean, I didn't really touch on, and Donnell will, that one of the trajectories that we need to take for New Zealand is to get away from carbon-intensive economic models and towards a knowledge economy, which I think Donnell is going to discuss. So it's been in our thinking that we also need to think about the just transition, and that's you just leap to solutions, no importation of fossil fuels, and we have to be able to define what that pathway is to get there, that's not disadvantaging people who are already suffering and not yeah. So.
No, that's fine. Thank you. I'll leave it at that point. A big hand for Anne. Thank you very much indeed.